Supreme Court is on full display heading into its new season, and they're set to hear the arguments about birthright citizenship. Tyrone Bowman live, it's all going down. Let's get it started, y'all. You know how we do over here. Thank you for each and every one of you who have subscribed to Tyrone Bowman Live. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming along on the journey, on the road, on the journey to getting 2,000 subscribers for the channel. We are the little engine that could, quote unquote. Now let's talk about this from CNN.com. The Supreme Court will hear a case over birthright citizenship this week. Has been acting like less a group seeking consensus and more like 9 justices clinging to their own interest. Ruptures have occurred in litigation arising from President Donald Trump's efforts to transform the federal government and remake America. But more broadly, the fractured court has been evident in the justices' separate opinions, behavior on the bench, and public appearances. Justices have increasingly gone their own way in memoirs and books, too. As a result, the court may be less inclined to speak with one voice. The riven injustices could, as the country hurtles toward a possible constitutional shutdown, risk appearing like yet another set of political actors unable to meet head-on threats to the rule of law. Lower court judges have found over and over that the Trump administration has rejected statutory and constitutional guarantees, including, as one judge observed last week, quote, that neither citizen nor alien be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, end quote. Thursday's hearing in the white marble and heavy red drape setting will offer the first Supreme Court oral arguments over any second-term Trump initiative since Chief Justice John Roberts swore in the president on January 20. The birthright citizenship case could become a platform for the agendas of individual justices. Already the focus of, quote, friend on the court, close quote, briefs varies widely as outside groups from constitutional scholars and legal historians to the Chamber of Commerce and Restaurant Law Center see the case as a catalyst for their respective issues. The justices have not specified the legal questions of their taking up, as it is normally the situation, but based on the Trump administration's request for emergency intervention and the limited filings at this point, the justices are likely to decide an important procedural issue rather than directly decide who's entitled to citizenship. The procedural issue centers on the method lower court judges have employed to stall Trump's proposed end to citizenship for anyone born in the United States. With limited briefing and a compressed schedule for a ruling, it's doubtful the court would fully address the constitutionality of erasing the birthright promise, which traces to 1868 and ratification of the 14th Amendment. The amendment invoked against the Trump administration is known as a, quote, nationwide injunction, end quote, when a single U.S. District Court judge blocks enforcement of a government action, not merely in the judge's district, but throughout the country. Administration lawyers have urged the justices to narrow the injunctions to cover only those parties to the cases. A resolution could affect challenges to a vast array of new presidential policy for years to come. When the Supreme Court of earlier eras faced confrontations involving a president, the justices strove for anonymity. But last year's decision in the Trump versus United States presidential immunity case showed this court unable to pull together the kind of consensus seen in previous separation of powers landmarks. Basically, the administration is asking the Supreme Court to deny anyone the right to be a citizen of this country. That's the whole argument in a nutshell. They want to have the right to deport whoever they want to have a right to deport, whether they are here legally, illegally, or born here. That's the whole crux and the matter of the argument. When you break it all down, when you get rid of all the the legal talk and get rid of all the sophistication. The bottom line is they want what they consider to be undesirables out of this country. You know, when I'm in court every day or every other day, what I'm finding out is that judges are quick to remind the defendant that the judges have to follow the letter of the law. Moreover, the justices on the dominant right side of the bench and the dissenting left have increasingly splintered. Roberts is often stymied and compromised by such fellow conservatives as Justice Samuel Alito and liberal Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Shows no qualms about breaking from her senior colleagues on the left to pen her own dissenting opinion. Jackson, who by virtue of her newest justice status sits at the far end of the bench, has sometimes seemed remote, both literally and figuratively. In a recent speech at a legal conference in Puerto Rico, Jackson criticized the rhetorical attack on the judiciary emanating from the administration, but also referred to the loneliness that can size a judge hearing difficult cases. Quote, "I do know that loneliness from my own service as a district judge in the District of Columbia," close quote, she said, quote, "it is very stressful to have to decide a difficult case in the spotlight and under pressure. When you add to that having to endure baseless attacks on your intelligence and integrity coming from people who are not so subtly trying to influence your decision-making, it can sometimes take raw courage to remain steadfast in doing what the law requires," end quote. Well, that's the norm now. Just attack, attack, attack. We're the only ones that are right. Everybody else is wrong. We don't care about nobody else's opinion. Only our opinion matters. What we say matters. We don't care about what you think. We don't care about what you want to say. We don't care about how you want to respond. If we say it is that way, then that's the way it is. They'll tell you, quick to tell you, this is a republic. This is not a democracy. Well, a democracy put the current president in power. It wasn't a republic. Let me say that again. A democracy put the current president in power. It wasn't a republic. You and I are governed by laws. Nobody is above the law. Martha Stewart was thrown into prison for something minor that these big boys are getting away with every single day. They did it because she was a powerful woman. That's why. Think about that for a moment. Just think about it. Now let's get back to this article. Within their own court ranks, Jackson and Alito have each leveled piercing criticism against colleagues in opposite directions. In a Saturday night dissent on April 19th, Alito unpulled his PQ in 7 bullet points, angry that the majority had prevented the administration from speedily deporting a group of migrants in Texas, as it had done with a separate set of migrants to El Salvador in March. Alito, joined only by Justice Clarence Thomas, no brainer there, disapprovingly noted that the emergency request from the migrants' lawyers had come in, quote, on Good Friday afternoon, end quote. And he condemned his colleagues for responding, quote, hastily and prematurely with dubious factual support to thwart the administration. While the Birthright citizenship case is the first Trump controversy the justices will air in their courtroom, they have decided several other preliminary challenges to his second-term initiatives behind the scenes based only on filings. Keep telling you all, it's not what goes on before the camera. It's what goes on when the camera is off. The majority of this stuff is all smoke and mirrors. It's about distraction. They'll have you talking about the price of eggs, meanwhile they're stripping you of your rights. They want black people and white people constantly arguing with one another. They want to deal with anti-blackness and so many other issues. They want to marginalize people, divide people. Don't you know divide and conquer is the way to conquer your enemy? Divide and conquer is the way to conquer anybody. And the powers that be, quote unquote, in this world, they're sitting back and they're laughing because to them, this is a game. It's a joke because they think their money makes them God. That's the problem. They believe they are Almighty God. They think they have autonomous power. They made themselves a demigod. They want human beings to bow down and worship them. That's the problem. Politicians are elected. It's not an anomaly that they're just going to assume a certain office. So back to the the article. All justices have yielded split votes, with the deportation controversies being most factious. As Justice Sonia Sotomayor dissented in an April 7 case centered on Trump's efforts to use the 18th century Alien Enemies Act to round up Venezuelan migrants and fly them to a Salvadorian prison, she condemned the administration and her colleagues on the right wing who accepted some of its arguments. Quote, history is no stranger to such lawless regimes, but this nation's system of laws is designed to prevent, not enable, their rise, she said, because the court should not reward the government's efforts to erode the rule of law. I respectfully dissent, end quote. She was joined by Jackson and the court's third liberal justice, Elena Kagan. Jackson then broke off and turned up the heat by referring to the court's infamous 1944 decision in Karamatsu versus the United States, permitting the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, and writing, quote, we are just as wrong now as we have been in the past with similarly devastating consequences. It just seems we are now less willing to face it, end quote. Some conservatives had spared no outage after the court on March 5th rejected the Trump's request to keep billions of dollars in foreign aid approved by Congress frozen. Alito wrote that he was, quote, stunned, end quote. He also declared that the lower court judge who temporarily blocked Trump's freeze on the foreign aid had engaged in, quote, an act of judicial hubris, end quote. Signing on to that dissent were Thomas and two of Thomas's appointees from his first term. And two of the Trump's appointees, rather, from his first term, Justices Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh has written separately to play down the ideological differences, and he regularly breaks away in a concurrent opinion that tries to appease the losing side, meaning he's a coward. Later in March, Kavanaugh joined the majority's decision upholding federal regulations for licensing, quote, ghost guns, end quote, weapons built from mail-order kits. But then Kavanaugh wrote separately to express concern and potentiality to protect from prosecution individuals and businesses who might, quote, have substantial difficulty determining when weapon part kits or unfurnished frames or receivers qualify as firearms and inadvertently face stiff penalties, end quote. Kavanaugh's statement prompted Sotomayor to then respond in her own solo concurrence, quote, that worries is unfounded. For more than half a century, firearms dealers, manufacturers, and importers have complied with the Gun Control Act's requirements. What is new is that some manufacturers have sought to circumvent the Act's requirements by selling easy-to-assemble firearm kits and frames, which they claim fall outside the state's scope. The Gun Control Act does not tolerate such evasion, end quote. Kavanaugh, who at his 2018 confirmation hearings repeatedly spoke of being, quote, a team player on a team of 9, end quote, had in earlier years been more of a partner to Roberts for compromise at the center of the bench. In recent cases, however, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, Trump's third appointee, has been more inclined to move to the center. Of the 9, Roberts and Kagan are less apt to write separately to put an additional slant on a minority or majority opinion. They are ideological and political opposites, but share an institutional mindset. Kagan, to be sure, does not mask her views during oral arguments in an April dissent over the validity of a task force that recommends preventive health care services under Obamacare. She alluded to the conservative majority's larger pattern of limiting the power of independent panels. Quote, "We don't go around just creating independent agencies," she quipped. "More often we destroy independent agencies," end quote. The most intriguing member of the bench remains Barrett, who has an overall conservative record, but pulled away from her brethren on enough instances to provoke great wrath from Trump hardliners. She may have pushed for Thursday's special hearing in the Birthright citizenship case, when she separated herself from fellow conservatives who similarly threw out a U.S. District Court judge's order in the early April Venezuelan migrant case. She signed on to a part of Sotomayor's dissent criticizing the majority for reaching its conclusion. Quote, "Without oral argument or the benefit of percolation in the lower courts, and with just a few days of deliberation based on bare bones briefing," end quote. Barrett is bound to offer the public greater insight into her way of operating in September, when she will publish a book on her life and approach to the law. Last year, Jackson published a memoir titled, quote, "Lovely One," end quote, and Kavanaugh is set to publish his own judicial memoir next year. Thomas, Sotomayor, and Gorsuch have previously written memoirs and books. So they're just going into the writing business and making money. And the vast majority of the decisions that are coming down from the Supreme Court, they've been really one-sided so far. According to promotional materials for Barrett's, quote, "Listening to the Law, Reflections on the Court and Constitution," end quote, her book will answer such questions as how she has adjusted to the court, what is it like to be a Supreme Court justice with school-aged children, how does the court get its cases, how does it decide them? And in a final question critical for court watchers, the materials concluded, quote, "How does she decide?" End quote. So it's all going down. It's more like a WWE WrestleMania match that's about to take place before the Supreme Court. It's more like the UFC. Boxing. We'll see what happens. Tyrone Bowman. Never surrender. Never quit.